Tony Blazier for the Motocross Vault presented by Blinzall. If you're in the market for some high quality racing oil for your 2-stroke or 4, make sure you go to blinzall.com and use our discount code VAULT20 to save 20% at checkout. Thank you for all the support.
Hi, this is Doug Dubach. Welcome to the Motocross Vault.
Hello and welcome back to the Motocross Vault. My name is Tony Blazier, and what this video is going to cover is a look back at Suzuki's all-new 125 RM for 1993. 93 is a big year for Suzuki. It has a complete redesign of their 250. The 125 looks completely new. It's actually probably more similar to the 92 than you probably would realize just to look at it, because it does look completely different. They totally changed the overall aesthetics of the arms this year. All new bodywork. In 92, the arms have been extremely colorful, kind of crazy looking machines. I wasn't a big fan of that back then, but now they're kind of cool. In 93, they really changed the look and went all yellow, much more subtle in its overall design. It's interesting because not all the manufacturers were really going subtle at that point. Kawasaki would still have their purple KXs a couple years after that. Honda in 95 would have their famously purple Hondas. But Suzuki actually was kind of toning things down. I guess they went completely off the rails in 92 and said, we need to pull this back a little bit. So the 93s, much more conservative in terms of overall looks. At the time, I loved the looks of the new bikes. I thought they were really handsome. The bodywork now, I don't know how I feel about it as much. I don't think it's worn on me as much, where the 92 RMs have kind of grown on me a little bit. The 93s have not so much now. I think they kind of, maybe not as attractive overall, but I know a lot of people love the looks of these bikes. They were certainly popular looking machines back in 93. Now this bike, as I said, is very similar to 92, but that's not a bad thing, because the 92 RM was by most standards considered the best bike that year. Wasn't necessarily the fastest. Honda in this year had the fastest motors. The CRs were just blazing fast, but they were difficult to ride. You know, I've had a couple of those Hondas, and they're pretty much, you know, mid and up, really mostly up motors. There's not a lot of torque, and if you ride one of these RMs, early 90s RMs had a lot of grunt. They had a lot of burst. They were the exact opposite of the Hondas, so that made them easier to get out of turns, but they didn't pull as far on top. They also handled very well in tight turns, but a little sketchy at speed, and I think most people at the time had no problem with that. You know, 125s in general, they're live machines, and the great you know, snappy handling, quick feel of these RMs made them really popular machines. This 93 bike was a very good bike. Some people thought it was the best machine. It wasn't unanimous that year. I think maybe overall it was as easy to ride as the 92, but still a very competitive machine. And what this video is going to cover is what they changed in 93, tell a little bit about you know, how the bike was on the track. If you like this sort of thing, make sure you check out some of the other videos I've done. I've done other reviews of many other classic motocross and off-road machines that you can find on the channel. If you'd like to support what I do here at the Motocross Vault, I have Motocross Vault merch available. I have several RM designs. I have some RM80 designs, RM250, RM125. I love Suzukis. I've had several of them over the years, and I have several designs based on the different Suzukis over the years. So if you'd like to support what I do, I will put a card here in the video and also a little link in the description below for my Motocross Vault merch, and I definitely appreciate you checking that out. So here, without further ado, is the story of the 1993 RM125. The early 1990s were a great time to be riding a Suzuki in the 125 class. After falling far behind their competition in the mid to late 80s, Suzuki came roaring back in the early 90s with a succession of ultra-competitive yellow 125s. During this era, the RMs carved out a successful niche with their snappy power bands and razor-sharp handling. While they were not as outright fast as the Hondas of the era, their more accessible power characteristics, well-sorted suspension, and feather-light feel made them extremely popular with riders looking for an alternative to the fast but demanding-to-ride CRs. In 1992, this combination of right-now power, good-enough suspension, and live handling had been enough to push the controversially styled RM125 to the front of a very competitive 125 field. The CR was faster, and the KX was plusher, but no other bike covered all their bases like the do-it-all RM. For most riders, the biggest knock on the 92 RM was its outlandish styling, which pushed the boundaries of good taste in an era where gold lame hammer pants and neon fanny packs were considered all the rage. For 1993, Suzuki looked to build on their 125 class success by refining, reshaping, and restyling their RM125. In 1992, the 125 RM had received an all-new frame, which had upped the chassis rigidity by 25% and endowed the yellow 125 with the sharpest turning on the track. For 1993, Suzuki once again upped the chassis rigidity by beefing up the box section backbone of the frame. Overall geometry was unchanged, but Suzuki claimed another 30% increase in chassis strength over 1992. Matched to the new frame was a redesigned set of 45mm Showa forks that featured slightly thinner tubing for 93 to save weight and fine-tune the chassis feel. In the rear, the show-off shock featured an all-new compression damping system with a 5mm larger piston to flow more fluid. The fluid was also upgraded for 93, with a redesigned formulation Suzuki claimed would be more resistant to heat and less prone to fading. Paired with the all-new shock was a revised linkage and swing arm, which employed the same progressive curve as 92, but offered increased strength for reduced flex. On the motor front, the 93 RM employed a highly modified version of the 92 RM's 124cc case reed mill. In use since 1989, this basic design was renowned for its strong low-end and mid-range power. Top-end thrust was sorely lacking in this generation of RM mills, but the motor was snappy, fun, and far easier to ride than the pro-focused power bands found in the Hondas of the time. For 1993, Suzuki looked to increase the RM's mid-range and broaden its overall power by adding several updates to the popular motor. An all-new cylinder added exhaust boost ports and enlarged the scavenging ports for better flow. Their power valve system was also revised to allow the valve to slide 1mm farther down into the exhaust port. A new crank plugged the balancing holes in 92 and increased the primary compression. In order to improve lubrication, the holes drilled into the piston were reduced in number but increased in size. Suzuki claimed this also made the piston lighter for 1993. Feeding the fuel and air to the motor was an all-new 36mm McCuney carburetor and a redesigned airbox. Both were enlarged for 1993, with the carburetor growing 1mm in size over 1992. The new airbox featured what Suzuki called an open-air design that they claimed would triple the time needed between services and offer a 20% increase in airflow to the motor. Keeping things cool was an all-new set of radiators that Suzuki claimed were more efficient for 1993. The transmission remained a 6-speed and continued to offer one of the smoothest shifting mechanisms in the class. Finishing off the motor package was an all-new exhaust system that Suzuki designed to pull farther on top for 1993. While much of the basic DNA of the RM125 remained similar to 1992, its outward appearance certainly did not. All new bodywork and graphics moved away from the extreme colors of 92 toward a much more restrained all-yellow design. The new frame was painted an understated carbon gray, and all the motor's castings featured a trick gunmetal coating that gave them a work-style sand-cast appearance. The redesigned bodywork incorporated Kawasaki-style wrap-around shrouds and a longer and flatter seat that made sliding forward in the turns easier. One interesting choice Suzuki made for 93 was to increase the width of the RM125's midsection. Apparently, testers found that making the bodywork thicker through the middle aided in gripping the machine in the rough. Suzuki spaced out the airbox and added thickness to the shrouds to give the riders more to hold on to. While this change was met with a bit of skepticism at the time, most riders actually ended up liking the feel of the new, thicker ergonomics. On the track, the new RM turned out to be far less different than its radical new looks would have predicted. The motor changes for 1993 yielded a more potent but less user-friendly power band than 92. There was slightly more power on top and a more potent mid-range, but less low-end torque than the old bike had had. It took more skill out of corners to get the RM into the meat of its power band, but once it was on the pipe, the new motor felt faster overall. It offered the strongest mid-range in the class, but there was not a lot of power above or below that explosive blast. It was a dead-center power band that went right now and signed off quickly. On tight tracks with short jump approaches, the RM's power was ideal as it leapt out of corners and pulled the RM over tricky doubles with ease. On faster and longer tracks, though, its lack of top-end power became a hindrance. If you gave the Honda time to spool up, then it would walk away from the RM. As in previous years, the Suzuki continued to offer a feathery clutch pull and a very slick shifting transmission, so keeping it in the meat of its narrow power spread was less of a chore than on the similarly punchy but more stubbornly shifting Yamaha. On the handling front, the RM125 remained one of the sharpest turning machines in the class. The new ergonomics made it easier to slide forward, and the thick midsection gave riders something to hang on to. It shredded through tight turns and made quick work of tricky switchbacks. The aggressive geometry, lightweight, and instant power of the RM made it a dream on Supercross-style circuits. Where things got a little less rosy was outdoors. There, the high speeds and sharp, choppy bumps gave the RM's chassis a bit of a fit. Out of turns, the RM's front end was very light and prone to head shake. This was the exact opposite of the Honda, which tended to shake its head under braking. This looseness under acceleration was much worse if the track was choppy, and the RM could become quite a handful out of rough and fast corners. At speed, the bike never quite felt planted and required constant attention to keep it on its intended path. For most 125 pilots, this was a fair trade-off to achieve the RM's fantastic cornering prowess, but there were better bikes available if playing in the desert was on your agenda. Some of the RM's instability out of turns was probably due to the action of its new show rear shock. For 85% of what the shock was asked to do, it worked very well, but the small holes and sharp curves it developed out of turns on a motocross track seemed to flummox its damping. Jumps, whoops, and G-outs were no issue, but the shock had a hard time dealing with small choppy bumps. This upset the chassis out of rough turns and exacerbated the RM's inherent instability. Thankfully, this was not a fatal flaw, and most riders rated the RM's shock as the second best in the field behind Kawasaki's Ultra Plush KX125. Up front, the RM's new 45mm Showa forks offered adjustments for both compression and rebound damping, and 12.2 inches of travel. Like the shock, they worked well on supercross-style obstacles, but tended to be harsh on small chop and square-edge bumps. Big jumps and deep whoops were no issue, but the RM lacked the plushness of the Yamaha and Kawasaki's front ends once the track got rough. It was still much better than the forks found on the Honda, however. On the detailing front, the RM125 was a step behind the best machines in the class at the time. Overall reliability was good, but the RM did tend to wear out faster than some of its competition. Piston and ring life was poor, and air leaks were common on many RMs. The clutch was also not particularly durable and prone to going away if it was pushed too hard. The quality of the stock bars, chain, seat cover, and silencer packing were also notoriously poor, and best replaced with aftermarket alternatives. In addition to being prone to tearing the cover, the front seat mount also liked to pop out of its channel where the seat pan met the tank. On the plus side were the RM's excellent brakes, which were second to the Honda, new bodywork, which was chubby but very good looking and well shaped, understated graphics, which most people thought were way classier than 92, and snappy power, which was super fun to ride. In the end, the 1993 RM125 turned out to be a step forward in ergonomics and aesthetics, but a step backward in ease of use on the track. The motor changes yielded more power in the middle, but sacrificed some of the excellent torque riders had loved the previous 3 years. This made the bike more appealing to experts, but harder to ride for those of lesser talent. The suspension changes for 93 also offered mixed results, with the RM failing to capture the do-it-all effectiveness of the Kawasaki. It still easily outpaced the fast but harsh Honda suspension, but most riders felt the 92 suspension package was superior to the 93's. If you were fast and talented, the 93 RM125's overall package was probably a step forward, but for many riders, the Kawasaki's broader power and better suspension made it a more attractive choice in 93. Not as outright fast as the CR or as incredibly plush as the KX, the 93 RM125 straddled the middle with sharp turning, a feathery feel, and snappy power. In 1993, that was not enough to make it a slam dunk for the best 125 in the land, but it remained a very competitive machine in the most competitive class in motocross. So there you have it. That's a look back at the 1993 Suzuki RM125, a machine that was very successful for Suzuki at the time. This is really the heyday of Suzuki in the 90s, the early 90s. They had some great machines in the 125 class. The 250s were a little sketchy at this point. If you've ever ridden one of some of those, they're kind of hairball machines at times. I had a 95 RM and the thing was a death trap. But the 125s were great bikes, much more successful on the track. You know, you had guys like Ezra Lusk and, I guess probably at this point, maybe Damon Huffman getting ready to come into the class. They were very, very competitive machines. I guess Brian Swink probably in 93 was the other 125 guy. So the bikes were very good on the track. This, again, big turnover in terms of appearance here in 93. And I think most people still think this is a good-looking motorcycle overall. Maybe not my favorite. I much prefer the 96 to this 93, but I think a lot of people do think of this as probably one of the best eras for the RM125, certainly in the 90s, maybe since the late 70s when they were great bikes as well, late 70s, early 80s. They had kind of a really bad lull there in the mid-80s, and they were coming back in the early 90s with some really good machines here. So if you like this sort of thing, make sure you check out some of the other videos on my channel. If you could like, subscribe, and share on social media, I would very much appreciate that. It helps. Leave comments below. That certainly helps the YouTube help other people find my channel, and I definitely appreciate all the support everybody gives me out there. So until we meet again, this is Tony Blazier from the Motocross Vault. Keep the rubber side down. Peace.